Sergeant Elias Wirth had a way of disappearing even when he stood in plain sight. In the 3rd Reconnaissance Division, men whispered that he had once lain in an open field for 11 hours with German patrols stepping so close their boots brushed the grass near his cheek. Others claimed he was a tracker trained by mountain men in Montana. Elias never confirmed anything. He simply listened, eyes calm, movements minimal, as if conserving every ounce of existence for when it mattered. By the winter of 1944, his unit had been scattered across the Ardennes forest, thinned by the chaos of surprise counterattacks and blizzards that erased entire rifle squads. The German advance pushed hard through the trees, and American lines bent under the pressure of relentless night raids. Elias, separated from his platoon during an artillery barrage, found himself alone but far from helpless. He walked with deliberate quietness, studying the land as though it spoke. Tracks told him which direction German scouts had fanned out in the early morning. Broken branches revealed the passage of a supply mule team. Even the way snow gathered atop a branch told him how long since someone brushed past. Nature to Elias was a silent briefing room. 3 days after losing his unit, he found it, the hollow log. It lay half buried under snow and moss, a fallen giant of a tree whose trunk had rotted from the inside. The opening was narrow and easily mistaken for shadow. Elias knelt beside it, tapping the wood with his knuckles. The echo was deep, a cavern disguised as decay. Inside he could just barely crawl, but once in he found enough space to sit upright. Through small fissures in the bark, he could see south toward the shallow ridgeline where German scout teams often appeared at dawn. Elias smiled for the first time in weeks. The forest around him was a labyrinth, and this log was the perfect blind spot. Ignored by animals, invisible to patrols, its scent masked by rot and resin. He spent the afternoon clearing debris, laying down dry spruce needles, and adjusting his rifle for cold weather accuracy. He wove a small net of branches at the entrance, so natural it looked untouched even from inches away. Night came softly, swallowed by the fog settling among the pines. Elias listened to distant voices, German, and the crunch of boots through shallow snow. They were searching. They were close. But he slid silently into the hollow, breathing slow, heartbeat quiet. No one noticed him. And that was exactly the point. The Ardennes forest had a way of swallowing sound, muffling even the sharpest noises beneath layers of frost-dampened earth and dense trunks. From inside the hollow log, Elias experienced this silence differently, like being underwater, listening to the world from behind a thick wall of ancient wood. Dawn approached with a faint bluish glow. Elias cracked the side of bark with the tiniest nudge of his knuckle, allowing a thin slit of light to illuminate his rifle. His breath formed ghosts in the cold air as he exhaled with precise rhythm. He had learned long ago that calm lungs steadied hands. He heard them before he saw them. Soft footsteps, too synchronized to be lost hikers. German scouts, moving in a spread formation. Their boots pressed the snow with military intention. Through one of the bark fissures, Elias saw their silhouettes take shape. 6 men, rifles raised, scanning the treeline. They moved with the confidence of hunters who believed themselves alone. If only they knew. Elias had no orders. No commanding officer expected him to be alive, let alone embedded mere yards from an enemy search route. But he knew the German scouts were the eyes of a larger formation. If they mapped this patch of forest, they would certainly flank the remaining Allied line further south. He made his choice. The first shot rang out like a muted cough. Elias fired from a position so low and concealed that the bullet seemed to come from the earth itself. The lead scout dropped instantly, face first into snow that puffed around him like smoke. Elias shifted, using the hollow's natural contours to obscure muzzle flash. The second man fell before the others even understood what direction to return fire in. They shouted short, panicked bursts of German, and dove behind trees for cover. But their cover wasn't enough. The fallen log sat at an angle that hid Elias from every predictable line of vision. Their bullets ripped through branches above him, hitting everything except the one place their enemy truly was. Elias waited for each man to peek out, the faintest movement revealing position. 3 more dropped. A 6th tried to sprint uphill, slipping on ice, and Elias fired through a crack barely wider than a finger. Silence returned, unnaturally swift. Elias exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. The snow around the bodies was already beginning to freeze, sealing the evidence of the skirmish. He stayed hidden another hour in case more scouts arrived. None did. By the time he crawled from the log, careful not to disturb the illusion of decay, he was no longer a lost sergeant in enemy territory. He had become the forest's phantom, a predator no patrol could account for. Elias had no illusions about war. Kill one patrol and another would follow. In enemy-held forest, patterns mattered. Germans sent scouts at dawn because dawn offered clarity, long shadows, crisp visibility, cold enough that sound behaved predictably. If scouts failed to report back, officers assumed ambush, and the response would be larger, more heavily armed. That meant tomorrow would be worse. Elias spent the night reinforcing the hideout. He widened internal space by scooping out punky wood with a folding knife, lining the chamber with branches that reduced vibration from gunfire. He even carved a drainage groove so melting snow wouldn't seep and freeze beneath him. By midnight, the hollow log resembled less a hideout and more a purpose-built sniper's nest. He slept in shallow intervals, attuned to every crackling branch in the distance. His dreams came not from fear but memory, faces of men he once commanded, now missing or dead. He wondered if any believed he still breathed. When morning came, it came fast. Elias observed the forest brighten through tiny splits in the bark. Frost shimmered atop the log like scattered diamonds. He aligned his rifle through a narrow aperture he had refined with sandpaper the previous night. The world outside appeared as a thin vignette of trees and snow. Then he heard them. Not 6 this time, more. Much more. 12 German scouts moved with tactical spacing, shoulders hunched, rifles high. They swept the area with the urgency of a unit that knew something had gone wrong the previous day. One carried binoculars. Another held a flare pistol. They weren't looking for a lost soldier. They were hunting a ghost. Elias steadied his breathing. He let them get close. Very close. Close enough that he could hear their boots compress the snow, hear their whispers, hear their nervous breaths fog the morning light. The entire line was inside his field of fire, a narrow corridor between 2 pines. He squeezed the trigger. The first man collapsed. Before the others could shout, Elias slid slightly left, firing again. Echoes bounced oddly inside the log, giving the false impression of multiple shooters. The Germans scrambled, confused, firing wildly at shadows, at rocks, at trees, everywhere except the rotting trunk lying innocently on the forest floor. Elias picked them off systematically. He waited for hesitation, for fear to disrupt discipline. It always happened. War made patterns even in chaos. The 12th scout broke formation and fled downslope. He ran fast, boots slipping on frost, shouting warnings into the forest. Elias inhaled, exhaled, and fired the cleanest shot of the morning. Silence followed. Snow drifted over the fallen men like a shroud. By the time the sun rose fully, the forest looked untouched, except for the bodies lying motionless in the pale dawn. Elias remained in the log, unseen, unheard, and impossibly alive. And now the German commanders would know something impossible. Their scouts were being killed by an enemy they could not find. Word traveled faster than men. By early afternoon, German units along the ridge were murmuring about the invisible sniper. An American trapped behind lines, operating alone, eliminating entire squads. Some claimed he used a captured rifle with a silencer. Others insisted he was a deserter who went feral. A few muttered about ghosts. The forest was old, they said, older than nations, and strange things lived in ancient woods. Elias listened to the enemy as much as he hunted them. When they spoke loudly, he noted their accents, Bavarian, Saxon, Austrian. When they fell silent suddenly, he knew they had spotted tracks or signs of struggle. But no one ever looked at the hollow log. Not once. It was too mundane, too natural, too obviously what it appeared to be. That invisibility was his shield. But even perfect concealment had limits. At dusk, he heard the heavy churn of boots, far more than a patrol. An entire platoon was advancing through the woods, roughly 30 men, spaced in methodical grid formation. They used metal prods to stab snowdrifts, to probe for buried traps. They moved with grim focus. This time they were not searching for intelligence, they were searching for vengeance. Elias steadied himself. He could not eliminate a platoon. The forest alone made that impossible. But he could buy time, maybe enough to slip south under cover of darkness, reconnect with Allied lines. Or he could stand and use the forest one last time. The first burst of gunfire came without warning. Two Germans opened up wildly toward what they thought was a muzzle flash from a stump. Elias didn't fire back, not yet. They were testing reactions, trying to draw him out. He remained perfectly still, letting their bullets shred only air. Minutes later, a squad approached within 20 yards. Elias watched them through a fissure. Their breath puffed in the evening chill. One of them tapped the log with his boot, unaware how close he had come to discovering everything. Elias waited until their formation thinned, until two men lagged behind the group. Then, with surgical precision, he fired twice, both shots muffled by snow-packed bark. The bodies dropped silently. The platoon spun in confusion, returning fire toward random targets. Officers shouted conflicting orders, panic overriding discipline. Elias began retreating deeper into the log, crawling backward inch by inch. When the Germans closed in, he slipped out a rear opening he had carved earlier, a contingency tunnel hidden beneath tangled roots. He vanished into the forest as bullets hammered the log he had already abandoned. Behind him, chaos erupted as soldiers attacked an empty hiding place, unaware their phantom had escaped. Elias moved south, guided by instinct, by darkness, and by the knowledge that dawn would bring another hunt. Elias traveled through the night on legs stiff with cold and adrenaline. Snow fell again, forming a thin veil that helped mask his tracks. He moved with the rhythm of a man who had spent years reading terrain, always choosing pine needles over snow, rock over dirt, stream beds over open ground. Every choice mattered when death followed. Hours passed before he rested, crouched beneath a half-frozen outcropping. His hands shook slightly as he drank from his canteen, exhaustion settling into the bones. He had survived nearly a week alone, fought off scouts, outsmarted a platoon, and slipped through gaps where no human should have been able to escape. But even ghosts grew tired. By dawn he saw the first sign of hope, Allied boot prints. Fresh ones. They led toward a shallow hill, curving toward a tree line where faint voices drifted. Elias stayed low, watching for tricks. German troops had been known to mimic American accents. But soon he spotted a helmet silhouette too distinct to confuse, the iconic curve of a US M1. He stepped into view, rifle raised in acknowledgement but not threat. The soldiers froze, two riflemen and a corporal, their eyes widening as the gaunt, frostbitten sergeant emerged like an apparition. "Jesus, sir, you're Wirth, aren't you? The recon unit thought you were dead." Elias shook his head. "Not dead. Just busy." They brought him to a makeshift command post where a potbelly stove crackled, filling the tent with blessed heat. Officers gathered around him, listening as he described the German movements, scout routes, and the platoon's sweeping patterns. But when he mentioned the hollow log, their expressions shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "You took out how many?" a captain asked. 12 at dawn yesterday. 6 the day before." "You did that from a fallen tree?" Elias shrugged. "It was good cover." Word spread quickly through the camp, faster than he liked, but he understood morale needed myths. Soldiers nodded respectfully as he passed, whispering about the hollow log sniper, a man who turned the forest against the enemy. That afternoon, reconnaissance confirmed everything Elias had reported. Allied artillery targeted the German positions he identified, halting the advance through that corridor. His survival hadn't just been miraculous, it had shifted the tactical balance. Before nightfall, Elias slipped away from camp for a moment, staring south toward the forest. Snowflakes drifted gently, burying all traces of battle. Somewhere in those trees lay the hollow log, splintered from German fire but still part of the landscape that kept him alive. He whispered a quiet thank you to the woods. A man could vanish in a forest, but sometimes if he fought hard enough he could also return.